Welcome everybody to the Single on Stiletto Show. I'm Suzanne Oshima and I'm a life and love transformational coach and founder of Single on Stilettos. Today we have a very special guest, Scot McKay, and he's a founder and dating coach of X and Y Communications. And I am super excited because today we're talking about 3 types of men to avoid. And I love interviewing Scot because he is so straightforward. He just tells it like it is. So before we jump into it, Scot, I would love for you to tell our audience a little bit about you and how you became a dating coach.
Well, first of all, thank you. I appreciate you having me on the show. It's a great honor and a privilege. And I just love speaking to women all over the world about how to find a great guy because it is absolutely possible. There are great men out there and there are great men looking for great women. That's a big part of why I became a dating coach. It's been 13 years now. I came from a really rough divorce situation. And I knew I didn't want to be a victim. Everybody told me, Scot, you've been the best father, the best husband. And it made me feel like a victim because, I did everything right and still got kicked to the curb, right? So to keep from feeling like that, I decided I was going to try to understand women, which is possible. And I was going to become the kind of man that women would be attracted to. It started working, and my friends said, hey, you know what you should do? You should write a book about all this because you're showing up with some really great women. And eventually I met the woman of my dreams, my lovely wife, Emily, who your audience is probably well acquainted with by now with all the different summits we've done. And the rest is history. We've been at it together for 13 years, changed lives all over the world. We come from a very pragmatic perspective. We talk about men being men, women being women, and what works, and nothing really supernatural or anything that excuses people's behavior one way or the other. Just if you want to be successful in your relationships with the person you're trying to attract, here's how you do it.
Exactly. So let's jump into it. Okay, so what's the first type of man that a woman should avoid?
Well, we spend lots of time thinking about this because a lot of times we don't avoid the people who we're thinking we ought to avoid. There's a pragmatic way to put this, and then there's more of a subjective way that focuses more on the women themselves and the men they tend to try to attract. And I think I'm going to go do a little bit of both. All right. Okay. The first one is going to be the same kind of men you've always been attracting, and the pattern has remained the same, and you don't like any of them, and you don't know why you keep attracting the wrong guy. Well, those are the guys you should stop attracting. And what typically happens and whatever that guy is, Mr. Emotionally Unavailable, Mr. He doesn't have any ambition, whatever he is, Mr. Still lives with his mommy. There's 3 right there.
Yeah, but, right.
If you have a pattern of attracting Mr. Wrong, and it just seems that guy is coming back again and again and again, you have to realize, look in the mirror and say, okay, look, I'm the common denominator in this pattern. And what's going on is I'm inviting that kind of guy in my life. I'm providing a safe haven for Mr. Wrong to feel at home. In other words, if it's like, every guy I'm with is just, has no job and ends up asking me for money, then as soon as that guy comes along and you just kind of roll your eyes and go, oh God, here's another guy asking me for money. I guess that's my lot in life. And you fall for it. He'll go, cool, that worked again. Even if he's experiencing some disdain from you or you don't like it or you're complaining to him about it, you're still accepting it. Whereas if you're like, no, I don't want a guy who I have to support, especially when we don't even barely know each other. I'm just not going to do this anymore. For me, again, this isn't something that's at all gender specific. Men deal with the same thing. We attract the same wrong woman all over again. I decided I wasn't going to attract women who were suffering from psychotic conditions anymore because they were ruining my life. So part of that was deciding, hey, you know what? I don't believe all women are crazy anymore. And I'm going to stop welcoming those women in my life. So that's the first one, for sure.
Yeah, and and I like that point that you brought up is that she's the common denominator, right? Is you don't get to play victim or you don't get to blame if it keeps happening. Like, shame on them the first time, but shame on you second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth time, right?
Yeah, and unfortunately what happens is when we see that pattern in others, even if we're causing it, the really insidious part, as I'm sure you know, Suzanne, is we start blaming the entire gender for being that way.
Yes.
So I have a lot of guys, for example, who come to me, all women are really mean and they're really selfish and they just take from me. But they've been inviting that pattern their whole time. So those are the only kind of women they're seeing. The second one I think is a lot more objective. And that's a guy who is very, very selfish and doesn't really think about others much. The N word is narcissist.
Yep.
And if someone's in this relationship for their own gain and they're not really thinking much of why the other person would possibly be in this allegedly two-way relationship, if not to help their life be better, then you need to stay away from that person. And unfortunately, people who are optimistic and generous tend to be prime targets for those narcissistic manipulators, because we want to give, and if we haven't given, if the other person is always kind of thinking we haven't given enough,
right?
So the person who's optimistic is thinking, well, they're being kind of a jerk about what I've given them already, but maybe they're just having a bad day. And they're right. I need to give even more. I need to re-up my efforts. This is the perfect storm for someone who's a very selfish, narcissistic person. And unfortunately, I think a lot of dating advice nowadays feeds that disease. Here's how you whisper 3 things into someone's ear and make them drop everything and give you what you want. And you see that on the men's side, the women's side, and you're in this business too. And sometimes we promote things for our friends and their new products. And I don't think I've seen a single new program or new idea for the women's dating market in 7 or 8 years. It's always, here's 3 simple obsession words that you whisper in some guy's ear. And you're on the same masterminds I'm on. It's like, I got something brand new. This is really special. It's completely different. And it's 3 new addiction words instead of 3 new obsession words. It's like, what am I going to do with these people? So that's the second one for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. So what's the third type of man that a woman should avoid?
A guy who's not available. How do I get this guy to break up with his wife and be with me? His divorce isn't quite, they sort of haven't even really filed the divorce yet, actually. But, he's still going to be my boyfriend. Or, he lives in Zimbabwe and I live in Seattle, but, he's my lover. Or someone who doesn't even speak your language, or someone you're never going to be able to meet. Kind of the latter description, someone who's, let's be realistic. Someone's in Utah, someone's in Virginia, and they met on eHarmony or Match.com. This one person in Virginia can't move. They've got children that they share with someone else who they've got custody of, and they're down by law for some reason. The person in Utah isn't about to move either. They've got, an obligation. Neither one of them can move. So where is this headed? It's headed nowhere. People kind of fantasize because they're in love with love. They don't ever get around to looking at the logistics of this relationship. They also fantasize about someone unavailable, suddenly becoming available for whatever relational or distance-related reasons or whatever reason you may have, when it's just not going to happen. And I think we need to stop pinning our hopes to someone who's just never really going to be available to a relationship with us. And it seems like this third one's so obvious, yet we've seen it so often. I think some people just need a wake-up call that, look, you do have a choice who you fall in love with, as Emily would say. And, if you save yourself the heartbreak early on by simply being honest with yourself and with the situation and not letting this other person manipulate you from afar and seeing it for what it is, I think we could save ourselves a lot of grief going forward.
Exactly. So let me ask you a question, though. For somebody that is already involved with somebody that is still married and says he is going to get a divorce, or maybe he's just separated and he's like, no, I'm going to do this, I'm going to file. And she's already in this relationship. I don't recommend giving an ultimatum because I always think ultimatums backfire. But what would you recommend, Scott, as a man? Like, how can she, give this one last shot, see if it can work without giving him an ultimatum?
Well, first of all, ultimatums are issued by the person who's coming from a position of weakness, not strength.
Right. Don't
kid yourself. Uh-huh. I don't know. The question to me, Suzanne, is kind of like, what do you tell a drug addict after you told them not to get involved with drugs? I think it's really an unfortunate situation when people choose to get involved with someone who's unavailable. You got a situation there if you're not going to give an ultimatum and you're in this relationship, only time will tell. But if you see the same excuses and the same pattern persisting and there's no movement at all forward, I mean, I think it's time to be realistic, even vis-a-vis the feelings you may be sharing or the promises you may be hearing, and you've got to have some self-respect, cut that off and move on.
Yeah. And it's sad to say, but sometimes you do have to cut your losses, right?
Yeah, and you know, on that subject, a lot of times people will say, well, I went out with this person for a year and a half and they didn't marry me, and I wasted all that time. I lost a year and a half of my life. Well, I think the better paradigm is to think in terms of sharing, is moving through your life and meeting people and having experiences. Not everybody you date you're going to get married to, and it's not a matter of wasting your time. I think that comes from a rather selfish, you know, process-oriented, transactional view of dating and relationships. If you kind of just forsake that there was another person here and the times you had and the memories you shared, and because you didn't get the outcome you wanted, the whole thing was a waste.
Right.
You know, I think part of, perhaps ironically to some, maybe the part of being the kind of person who's ready to be one half of a great relationship is realizing that, you know, you're sharing something with someone else. And it isn't about, I need to get married or I need to start making babies or, you know, I'm sick of being lonely. It's about, here's a person I want to be in partnership with. Here's someone I love to be around. Here's someone who's my best friend. And we're headed towards something special. And if it doesn't work out, you know, that's probably for the best also.
Yeah.
It's sometimes hard to think that way, but I really just don't think there's any other healthy way to look at it.
Yeah. I like your perspective, Scott. I think that's great.
Thank you.
These have been some great tips. So, Scott, I know you have a free gift for the ladies, so can you tell them about it?
Yeah, well, you know, my wife is a wonderful world-class dating coach, and she has a book called Letters from Friends, where she has compiled the most poignant and meaningful questions asked to her over years by women, compile them into one volume, and the next thing you know, you have just about every question you could want to ask about dating and relationships answered in one place. That's a free gift. If you sign up for her newsletter, she'll send you a couple other free gifts, one of which is called How to Know Whether He's Serious About Marrying You or Not, and that kind of hits to the heart of what we've been talking about here. And while you're there, click the little red button in the upper right corner, or maybe a pink button on that site. It says talk to us free for 25 minutes. We are who you think we are. We're very down to earth. We'd love to talk to you and see if it's a good fit.
Awesome. So, ladies, if you would like to get Emily and Scott's free gift, you can click on the link below the video. And if you're listening to the podcast, go to singleonstilettos.com and look for Scot McKay's interview, and you can get his free gift. So, thanks, everybody, for joining us on the Single on Stilettos show. Our show is available both in video format and podcast format. If you would like to view the videos, you can go to singleonstilettos.com. If you like to get the podcast, you can download it from iTunes. And if you would like to get our free gift, the Secrets About Men video series, you can click right here on the video, or you can go to singleonstilettos.com.